Big Meech sat in his prison cell, staring at the cold walls that had become his world for nearly 2 decades. The man who once ran one of the most powerful drug empires in America, the Black Mafia Family, BMF, had seen it all: money, fame, power, and betrayal. But nothing could have prepared him for what had just happened. For years, Big Meech had kept his head high, despite the circumstances. He had accepted his fate, knowing that the choices he made had led him to this point. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: his belief that certain people would always have his back. One of those people was Floyd Mayweather, the undefeated boxing champion, a man who had once been like family to him. Meech and Floyd went way back. Before the FBI brought down the BMF empire, Mayweather had been a close associate, enjoying the lavish lifestyle that Meech and his crew provided. The two were often seen together at parties, flashing stacks of cash, riding in expensive cars, and throwing legendary events that left the streets talking for weeks. It wasn't just a friendship, it was brotherhood. Or at least, that's what Meech thought. So when word got back to him that Mayweather had turned his back on him in the worst possible way, it hit like a punch to the gut. In prison, news travels fast. And when the rumors started circulating that Mayweather had been speaking negatively about him, Meech refused to believe it at first. After all, Floyd had been one of the biggest beneficiaries of BMF's success. The luxury, the connections, the lifestyle. Meech had helped pave the way for Floyd to become the superstar he was. But as more details emerged, the truth became impossible to ignore. According to inside sources, Floyd had not only distanced himself from Big Meech, but had allegedly made comments suggesting that Meech's downfall was inevitable. Worse yet, there were whispers that Floyd had refused to provide financial support when it was needed the most. Meech had always prided himself on being a man of principle. Loyalty was everything to him. In the streets, trust was more valuable than money. And in his darkest hours, he had expected those he had once helped to return the favor. Not necessarily with millions, but at least with respect. But what broke Meech wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. He had never imagined that someone he once considered a brother would turn his back on him when he needed him the most. To make things worse, some even claimed that Floyd had been cozying up to people who had worked against BMF, people who had played a role in taking down everything Meech had built. The anger inside him boiled, but it wasn't just anger. It was disappointment. For years, Big Meech had maintained his silence, refusing to cooperate with authorities despite the pressure. While others crumbled, he stayed solid. He took his sentence like a man, refusing to give up names, refusing to point fingers. It was the code he lived by, a code that he now realized Mayweather had never understood. What hurt even more was that Floyd had the means to help but chose not to. With a net worth that stretched into the hundreds of millions, it would have been nothing for him to assist in legal fees, support Meech's family, or even just show public solidarity. Instead, it seemed like Floyd had erased their history, acting as if Meech had never been a part of his journey. Some say that Floyd was simply protecting his image, that aligning himself with a convicted drug kingpin could harm his business interests. Others argue that Floyd had been waiting for the moment to separate himself from the BMF legacy, knowing that Meech's time in prison meant he no longer had the power he once wielded. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear: Big Meech felt the betrayal deeply, and when he finally spoke on it, his words carried the weight of a man who had been pushed to his breaking point. "No money for a rat," he reportedly said, his voice filled with a mix of pain and resentment. The words sent shockwaves through those who had once been part of the BMF circle. To those who understood the code, Meech's statement was more than just an attack. It was an accusation. Was Floyd working with people who had turned on BMF? Had he aligned himself with informants or those who had played a role in dismantling the empire? The streets were now buzzing with questions. People who had once idolized Mayweather for his undefeated record were now looking at him differently. Loyalty mattered in the world Meech came from, and for Floyd to turn his back on a man who had once embraced him as family, that was unforgivable. Meech had lost many things over the years: his freedom, his empire, his wealth. But the one thing he had held onto was his honor. He had never snitched, never begged, never broken under pressure. And now, as he sat in his cell, he realized that not everyone was built the same. The pain of betrayal lingers longer than the pain of prison. And for Big Meech, this was a lesson learned the hard way.